quarantine and onto the streets. But the George Floyd story is very different depending on who you talk to. He was arrested by Minneapolis police after a convenience store said he used counterfeit money. 15 minutes later, he was on the ground screaming he couldn't breathe, and then he was unconscious. America was consumed with anger and violence. Over 24 people died. Fires were set, squad cars destroyed, businesses looted. Rioters caused nearly $2 billion in damage. Police departments across the country were defunded. The police, the people, demoralized. This triggered a national crime wave, a pressure campaign to force critical race theory into schools, and a corporate shakedown that resulted in a massive transfer of wealth. So a highly respected and award-winning journalist from Minneapolis named Liz Collin decided to investigate. Because any initial investigation into George Floyd was deemed racist and radioactive. Her documentary, out today, called The Fall of Minneapolis, tells you things you haven't heard before. Remember, this was the narrative.
George Floyd was a healthy young man.
But the medical examiner, Dr. Andrew Baker, found that he had two separate and very serious heart conditions. One artery was almost completely blocked. And Floyd had lethal traces of fentanyl in his system, on top of COVID-19. The medical examiner continued, quote, "If he were found dead at home, alone, and no other apparent causes, this could be acceptable to call an OD."
Do you want something right now?
No, nothing. Because you act erratic.
If George Floyd would have told the truth about fentanyl and methamphetamine, could that have helped to save his life?
Yes, it could have. That's proven by what happened the year before when he was arrested by Minneapolis police and he was putting tablets in his mouth.
So wait a second. Did you know that George Floyd had a similar interaction with police just a year before his death?
How was George Floyd acting during that arrest in 2019?
Everything was almost identical. I mean, the initial stop, when I first started to approach him, you know, he was uncooperative. He wasn't listening to my commands. He was very agitated.
Just keep your hands out where I can see him. Hey! Let me... Keep your hands where I can see them.
Let me see your hands. Stay in the car. Let me see your other hand.
During the time, I couldn't see his hands. He was moving them out. We found out later he's probably eating dope.
So this is a very important piece of material that the country was denied access to while Black Lives Matter wrecked our country. And what were police doing when they were wrecking the country?
We were ordered not to do anything, waiting to be told what not to do next.
Did you ever feel like there was a plan?
I am reaching to the command post over and over again about what's our plan, without any response whatsoever.
They're not saying anything at all?
No, nothing.
Command post, you copy? Command, can you advise?
The elections were coming up. Everything's politically driven. They were going to use this incident for a political narrative, and they did.
Remember, this was an election year, and the media couldn't critique young voters. They needed them fully engaged in a righteous cause.
That it has been entirely peaceful, sometimes angry, but entirely peaceful. So there is some of that, but for the most part, they have been very, very peaceful.
Protest is a critical part of democracy. We cannot let protesters be likened to criminals.
But most damning are Collins's interviews with police officers who claim that the knee to the neck tactic, they call it maximum restraint technique, MRT, was something they were trained to do.
Were you trained in MRT, the maximal restraint technique?
Yes.
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 Yes, I was.
Yes, we all were.
Yes, all the police officers were trained in the MRT.
Your police chief said on the stand that he didn't recognize that technique.
Mm-hmm. I heard him say that. It's tough to hear people lie, just straight lie.
So these officers are accusing the Minneapolis police chief of committing perjury during the George Floyd trial. The officers feel they were sacrificed for politics.
Everything changed. And it didn't have to. Had we had strong leadership right from the very top. The governor, the mayor, our chief of police, city council of Minneapolis, the assistant chief, and the deputy chiefs. This is how you treat your people. You just turn your back on us.
Here now, Liz Collins. She's an award-winning investigative reporter and producer of The Fall of Minneapolis, which is just breaking today. So, how badly were the American people lied to?
Gosh, it's hard to condense this, Jesse, in a short segment, to be honest, and that was really why we wanted to put out this documentary, to give people a look at the lies, really from the start, and we're still all paying the consequences of them. This is the very first time the police body camera footage was withheld from the public by Minneapolis police. That was for a reason, so we start the film right there with, here's what you were not allowed to see. That was only leaked about 2.5 months later. You have George Floyd complaining that he can't breathe before Derek Chauvin even arrives on scene. You have a black officer who arrested George Floyd that day, and Alex King, and we speak to him quite a bit in the film. Remember, this is supposed to be the most racist police interaction in American history, but nobody talks about the black officer. You also have on film the officers who are calling for an ambulance 36 seconds after George Floyd himself asked to be laid on the ground that day. And people should be upset. They should wonder, why was this kept from them for so long? I myself was working in mainstream media at the time, and I knew there was a lot more to this story, and was really disgusted about what the press knew, what they were privy to, and they were refusing to pass along to properly inform the public about what went on.
Liz, tell us a little bit about that 2019 George Floyd arrest that we didn't know.
So, again, we're told the very next day after what transpired in 2020 that the Minneapolis Police Department had never heard of George Floyd. They'd never had any interaction with him at all. But he had been the subject of an undercover drug investigation that went on for months by Minneapolis police. And you see the arrest take place of George Floyd in 2019, and he is saying almost exactly the same things he's saying in 2020. If you play the body camera footage from both incidents side by side, which we do a bit in the film, you can see that this is clearly someone who's experienced with police interactions. We go into his background. Again, that was held from the public as well.
So you spoke to the medical expert who said it was odd to see the FBI meeting with the medical examiner for a local crime. We reached out to the FBI for comment. We haven't heard back. Well, let's listen to this quickly.
The original autopsy was done 12 hours after he was declared dead. The official report that came out a little bit later, I'm told, was changed.
What do you think of the federal government's involvement in this case?
One of the first questions I asked was the FBI involved? And when I found out the FBI involvement was within 12 to 24 hours, that really raised a red flag for me.
So is that usual for the FBI to get involved like that for a local crime?
You know, I'll be honest here. My husband was a longtime Minneapolis police officer. He was the president of the police union at the time, and he talks about this. I put out a book. It's called They're Lying, The Media, the Left, and the Death of George Floyd. The movie is based on that book that came out last year. But he talks about that in his 30-plus years in Minneapolis police serving. That's never happened before. And everybody involved in the film talks about how they've never seen a case that went to the FBI this quickly. That call was made, we know, by the Minneapolis police chief within hours of this incident. And I do believe that, you know, this is why much of this evidence was kept from the public, because there was so much involvement from people that had never been involved before.
Was the autopsy report